Let's talk about the like too long didn't read guide to Project 2025. What are the big takeaways? What are they trying to do within the document?
Yeah, okay. So I actually pulled up my story here because I myself, though I've read all 920 pages, cannot remember all of
Bless you.
it. So a big one is, they're very focused on gender and gender identity, LGBTQ people, um, across almost every facet of this plan, every department of the federal government, they would be trying to curtail LGBTQ rights. This would take a number of forms, and it also would be implemented in ways that would affect straight cis women, because it's, for example, barring the EEOC from even tracking kind of like sex discrimination in the way that it's been tracked. It is eliminating collecting data on what they call DEI efforts, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and women are often included in that. On the front of reproductive rights, they want to create a Department of Life that will collect data on people who have abortion using, and this is a quote, every available tool, including the cutting of funds to ensure that every state reports exactly how many abortions take place within its borders, at what gestational age of the child, for what reason, the mother's state of residence, and by what method. They would try to rescind a Biden administration guidance that an emergency medicine law that requires hospitals provide abortion care in emergencies. They would ask the FDA to reverse the 2000 approval of the medication abortion drug mifepristone. And then getting into education, I mean, there's just a lot. They would rescind a Biden era revision to a 1972 civil rights law that prohibits sex-based discrimination by educational programs. So that would include discrimination against women. That would be rescinded. And education directly relates to kind of your economic outlook for the rest of your life. Like, going to college and what degrees you have and what training you have. Would rescind the public service loan forgiveness program. So that's people who work in federal, state, local, or tribal governments or for a nonprofit. Guess what? That's teachers. That is, a field that's disproportionately staffed by women. So really the scope of this cannot be understated. It is a vision to remake American life, kind of in the view of far right Christians.
One of the things I've also heard with Project 2025 is they want to track pregnancies.
Yeah, so that's the Department of Life that I was talking about.
Yep.
And yes, that would apply. And what they're going to try and do is use that data to curtail abortion. So this is even in states where it would remain legal, because right now it's an issue left up to the states. So it doesn't matter if you're in California or New York where abortion is protected and will remain so for the foreseeable future, probably. They would also be collecting data on you to use to try to stop abortion.
Yep. A quick aside, and then I have more questions for you. We're having women die in their cars or bleed out because uh, regardless of if you want to terminate a pregnancy for other reasons, but this specifically of this is life-saving, truly life-saving healthcare, and they are trying to either completely eliminate it or restrict it to the point where doctors do not feel comfortable having performing these procedures because they're worried of legal repercussions. This is already happening because of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And with something like Project 2025, it's only going to get worse.
And this is very real. I mean, just this week that we're recording this is just a few days after the Supreme Court said it wouldn't take an emergency appeal out of Texas.
Yep.
To break that down as simply as I can in 30 seconds, the Biden administration had challenged Texas's abortion ban, which is a very strict abortion ban, saying, even though you have this abortion ban, there's still this federal law on the books that hospitals that receive federal funds have to treat people in emergency situations. Sometimes in an emergency situation, that means, providing abortion care. And Texas said, no, that's not how we interpret our abortion ban. And so it's winding its way through the federal courts right now because it's related to a conflict between a state abortion ban and federal emergency medicine law. And what the Supreme Court did by not taking that at this point, it left an injunction in place where women in Texas and people who are pregnant in Texas do not have access to that emergency medical law. So if you present at a hospital and it's maybe you'll survive this, but maybe you won't, they don't have to give you an abortion right now because it's already been through a couple stages of the legal process. Presumably, according to the lawyers I've talked to, that would apply to that circuit in the federal system. So it's now, in theory, in place. It hasn't been challenged, but it's in theory also in place in Mississippi and Louisiana. So that's already 3 states that, by the way, have abysmal maternal health care outcomes, particularly for women of color in those states, where you can show up at an emergency room and not know if they're going to be able to help you.
Yep. I just gotta take a breath. I'm really mad.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, writing my book, everyone was like, wasn't it depressing? I'm gesturing because it's behind me, but it was, it actually filled me with rage a lot of days
Yep.
when I was writing
Yep.
this book and listening
Yep.
to what people have had to go through in order to both get care and because my book focuses on doctors to a large extent, what they've had to
Yeah.
go through to continue providing care to their
Yeah.
patients. Yeah.
Well, and while the courts are debating, whether or not it's going to be legal or not, women are dying.
Well, and the depressing joke of it all is Alito wrote in the Dobbs decision, Justice Alito wrote, well, this now removes the question of abortion from the courts. And now the courts won't have to be involved anymore. And obviously what we've seen is the exact opposite. There are
Exact opposite.
dozens, if not hundreds of cases pending right now across this country related to abortion bans.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about this before. Project 2025. It seems Handmaid's Tale esque. It seems crazy, right? It seems uh just an overwhelming amount of like it just seems nuts. It seems crazy. It seems so backwards. I think it can be very easy then to go, well, so this is so crazy. It's not going to happen. Or it's a small group of people. This is very serious, everybody. Like this is not one of those things that is like a small group of people have these crazy ideas. Like these are the people who are donating to Donald Trump and other conservatives' campaigns. These are people who are swaying those kind of elections. So debunk that for me. Oh, it's too crazy, so it's never going to happen.
I mean, as I said, there's 140 or more people who worked on Project 2025 that served in some capacity under Trump. One example, Roger Severino with the Heritage Foundation, because the Heritage Foundation is the organization that puts out this report every election. He was his DHHS secretary, Department of Health and Human Services. So that would be the federal entity that oversees things like healthcare, which would include reproductive health care. Who's to say he wouldn't be DHHS secretary again? It's hard to say that second H because there's also a Department of Homeland Security. So DHHS. And who's to say that he wouldn't implement the vision he's just laid out in Project 2025? So, this is Donald Trump and JD Vance are doing all they can to distance themselves from Project 2025. But the reality is, Trump employed a lot of these people before. He's likely to do so again. He rides on, private planes to go speak at conferences to these people. He's on video praising Project 2025 as they were working on it
Yep.
and what a vision it would be. And
Well,
so
and like, don't get it twisted. The reason he's trying to distance himself from it is everybody's like, this plan is crazy. Like,
yes.
you'd
Well,
be crazy.
it's wildly unpopular. This is not
Yes.
in line with what the American people want.
And the same thing with abortion rights, too, which is
Yes.
directly related to Project 2025, is the reason this man is so wish washy on abortion is because he goes wherever the money is. He goes wherever the money is. And a lot of the money is in Christian nationalists, evangelical Christians who do not want any kind of abortion access or want it so limited. But the vast majority of the American people don't want that. So that's why he's so back and forth about all of these things, because he says, no, I'm pro abortion, or I'm, pro, this week, number of weeks. And then everybody who's donating to him, his campaign gets mad. So he has to backtrack.
I have started saying former President Trump is not trying to have it both ways on abortion. He's trying to have it all ways. And like, look at
Yeah.
IVF is a really good example. And he's not the only one doing this, by the way. A lot of
Yeah.
Republicans are doing this. The Republican Party in their platform was, only a few lines on reproductive health care. You might have seen headlines, Republican Party softens its stance on abortion, because for the first time in a long time, they didn't have a line in there that said something like, and Congress should pass a 20-week ban. They just left Congress out of it. During the one debate that Donald Trump had with Vice President Kamala Harris, one of the only accurate things he said in the answer on abortion was that neither one of them were likely going to have the votes in Congress to pass either legislation protecting abortion rights or banning abortion federally. That's probably the case unless there's something on the radar with the Senate that no one is seeing thus far. Now they could change the filibuster, but that's a whole nother conversation. So they don't need to have in their platform anything about federal legislation if it's not going to happen either way, right? But what they did have in their platform, and he has complimented the platform and said it's beautiful, I believe is the word he used, is that they would love to see states, and that they will support states enacting 14th Amendment rights for everyone after 51 years, which is a direct reference to Roe, that they couldn't do this when Roe was in place, and to draw the straight line for everyone. 14th Amendment rights for fetuses, embryos, and sometimes even fertilized eggs, depending on who you're talking to in the anti-abortion movement, would basically mean that those, embryos and fetuses have the same legal rights as you or I under the Constitution. And so that is something called fetal personhood. That's how you often hear it talked about. They don't like to use those words anymore because fetal personhood is not popular with the American people. But so if you start to bury it under like legalese and like constitutional rights for everyone, well, of course, that sounds amazing. It's fetal personhood. Then in the third, part of that sentence in the platform, it says, oh, but, we also support IVF, because we saw what happened over, earlier this year when the Alabama Supreme Court said that, their fetal personhood law in that state prevented IVF. You saw the Republican controlled legislature in that state scramble to try and fix it because IVF is very popular among people. And so you have a variety of Republicans right now, including Donald Trump, saying, well, don't worry, we support IVF. But it is fundamentally impossible, according to legal experts, to support fetal personhood and support IVF. So when you saw those headlines potentially after that platform came out, Republican Party softens its stance on abortion, they've just changed the path that they want to restrict abortion. They haven't changed the underlying goal, and it would absolutely prohibit, or at best case scenario, make it very difficult to get reproductive health care services like IVF.